Joining us from Westfield, Indiana is Jamie Baxter. Jamie is the founder and CEO of Exodus 90. Welcome to Jesuitical, Jamie.
Ashley, Zac, thanks for having me. Appreciate the invite.
Thanks so much for coming on. Really excited to talk to you. We're going to cover a lot of ground, I hope, today. Going to get into Exodus 90 specifically later, but want to get some of your own vocation story. I know you spent some time in the seminary and eventually kind of discerned out of that. And I know a lot of people in our audience are in a similar situation or know someone who is. So would love to hear kind of how you came to that and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, thank you.
In like 15 seconds, go.
Yeah. Well, it's a great place to start. Yeah, it's that's the most important thing. So, I grew up in Indiana. A really big part of my own story is that my father came back to the faith when I was a kid. So I remember life before and after Christ. And through my father, my mom would come back to the church.
Can I ask what brought your dad back? Sorry to jump in right away.
Well, yeah, it's actually
this
quite
feels
a
like an
story.
origin story question, so I want to...
Yeah, it's a story, and it's not without suffering, honestly. My one of his sisters tragically died in a car accident, and God worked in a mysterious way, actually, and really waking up my uncle, my father's older brother, my Uncle Stu. I love my Uncle Stu. He's a crazy uncle type, if you have one of those.
I've got a few.
So we say he lives in the Stuniverse. That's what we say affectionately. But a man of at the time was of the tragedy was quite lost, and basically he became somewhat obsessed with this question of was his sister ready to die? And through a couple twists and turns would have a profound conversion experience and become this real evangelizing force around Indianapolis. Actually, I've met so many people in the years since that have come back to the faith through my uncle's influence, and one of those people was my dad. And so through that tragedy and through the conversion of my uncle, he invited my father onto a Cursillo retreat, part of the charismatic renewal, and just really came to meet Christ the Lord. And that
How old
rippled
were you
into our
around
family.
then?
I was 6 or so.
Okay.
Yeah, 5 or 6. Yeah. Okay. So quite young. And so I just remember, wow, you're different. In addition to just like, okay, there's these pictures of this man now on our wall. It's just our relationship seemed different. And after that time, it's just seared into my imagination. I'd wake up as a kid. I'd typically walk downstairs and eat ice cream, like first thing. That was part of my daily routine.
Wait, is this for real?
For real, totally true. But I would see my father every morning, same place. Some days he'd see me, some days he wouldn't, but he'd be in his prayer chair, and just so obviously in touch with someone invisible. So this really seared into my imagination as a kid that, at least this is how my father begins his day, and that's made a huge impression on me. So I would go on to, there's many other factors, of course, in anyone's story, but I would go to seminary at the age of 18. I was there for 6 years, and eventually discerned that, I had a call. It was just different from what I first thought. And, I really longed to be married and desired to be out in the world, and, started working on what's become Exodus 90, basically, from the time that I left. But in no small way, my dad's impact on me has certainly shaped my interest in men's formation because of how it blessed me.
Did you usually give up ice cream for Lent? Was that the first stab at asceticism for you?
Yeah. Something like that. Yeah, I'd start small with chocolate or whatever.
I want to go deeper if we can, just a little bit, this
Sure.
Decision to discern out of the seminary. Because 6 years is that's the old college try, if nothing else.
And starting at 18 is not that common anymore. So you made this huge decision at a pretty young age, and then the only life you knew for 6 years was seminary. So, getting out of that seems like those are two very big decisions to have to make.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Looking back, you're definitely right about that. I was part of a high school boys serving fraternity in my parish. That was at many parishes, around our diocese. And so I had a lot of friends that were going to the seminary. Because of that fraternity, I was in touch with a lot of priests, who were kind of my heroes growing up in many ways. And so it was a little bit more regular, for me when you kind of consider the context to go to the seminary so young. And in many ways, some of the seminarians from the diocese were already my best friends, in high school. So it's kind of that element. But yeah, to leave after 6 years was no small thing, and I think, I'm sure you probably know, a couple men and women who have discerned out of, priestly or religious vocations. And, the transition to lay life is challenging for sure. I really don't think this is something that as a church we've really figured out how to best support people on the way out. And especially because, we talk about our jobs in a way that it's like, hey, take it easy. It's not your identity, but, the priesthood is your identity. And when that's kind of what you're, discerning and kind of, seeking to take on, and you leave, it can be really dizzying. And, for me was absolutely the source of a lot of, suffering, just like, okay, who am I now? What is my life for? It's not what I had thought. So
do you think there's
yeah.
shame around it? Like, oh, I wanted to do this thing. I had this idea of who I was, and not, I mean, because from one angle, I'm like, and we all talk like, oh yeah, if you reach this in freedom, like you listen to where God's calling you, and it all sounds nice, right? But the reality of how you feel and maybe these conversations you're having with other people might be a little different in how they hit home.
Yeah, it definitely can be. It's and it can be the most challenging, closest to home, right? The people that knew you, when you were younger and on your way out, right? And that's a common theme in the scriptures. In the life of our Lord, it's just, it can be like, yeah, wow, what happened to you? And just a story on this, actually, I was asked to give a talk shortly after I discerned out, and there was somebody at my parish that came to all my things as a seminarian religiously, and then I was going to give a talk, and I'm sorry, sweetie, I don't have time tonight, I gotta go. And it was so cutting. I was like, yikes, I gotta kind of collect myself.
They don't have time for you anymore now that you're
yeah
not.
yeah. So but at the same time, all of our sufferings, right, they bring us to greater dependence on God. And there's so much kind of spiritual fruit that came from this time. I'd say at 24 or 23, before I discerned out, I had everything figured out. And when I did, I was like, wow, I have no idea how anything works. I had, just as a small example, I had never paid a bill in my entire life, at the age of 24. And up to that point, everything, had been provided for me. And I was, had a blessed upbringing, that was the case even before I went to the seminary. And so, yeah, I mean, I found myself regularly meeting normal, regular people, and just was amazed at them. Like, hey, how have you figured out all this stuff? Like the insurance, you have to pay for that. How do you do that?
My God, have you ever been to IKEA? What a magical world.
You mentioned the church not having the greatest support systems for people transitioning out. Were there people or tools or programs that you had access to that helped you with those very practical things, but also discerning what you were going to do next?
Yeah, for sure. So I did spend a year kind of in a pastoral year, self-imposed. So there's now these things called propedeutic years within the typical formation process.
We're working with the marketing department on a better term.
Okay, yeah, that'd be good.
We're still workshopping it, but yeah, propedeutic is, I think, the current term.
Yeah, so I didn't have that back then, and so I just kind of imposed it on myself. And it was basically on this thought, well, I was here for a long time. I want to make sure that I leave, and I don't have regret, and I'm making the right decision on, before God and on my life. And so that was a blessing. I lived with our vocations director at the time, and it's a year I look back on actually with a lot of fondness. So there was that, and then also, a couple of mentors, in particular, therapy is actually a very, very important part of my own journey and transformation over the last, even more than 10 years. So my therapist was hugely helpful, devout Catholic man, a man I look up to and admire very much. So anyway, those couple of things were helpful to me. But, I would say I always make time now as seminarians and guys discerning out reach out to me, kind of for help, because it can be, it can be a challenging time. And it's almost like the more seriously you enter into the formation process, the more you understand, what's at stake, the harder it can be. And that's completely normal. And that's kind of what I like to kind of reassure the guys that, give it a shot, but the Lord had another plan for.
I want to figure out what your discernment was kind of looking like once you're out. You're like, what do I want to do with my life next? I know I want to get married. I feel like a lot of guys are like, okay, I'm not going to be what I call a professional Catholic. Like, I'm not going to work for the church in some other way. And yet, was there still this like desire to serve the church still there? Like, you weren't just going to like go work, I don't know, at a bank or go to law school or something like that.
That's a great question. For me, I'm a little bit of odd in this way. I would not, had, Exodus not become what it became, there's no way I would have been doing church ecclesial work still. I would have tried to, I don't know, even as a young kid, I was always somewhat entrepreneurial, was big into garage sailing growing up, trading cards, all that kind of stuff. I'd tell you a story, actually. I'm somewhat embarrassed by this, but, we'll put it on the record publicly. So there's this really cool kid on my bus, and I was, I don't know, 5th grade or something. And he was in the 8th grade, this kid I made this notorious trade with. And he was the starting running back in 8th grade. Really cool kid. I still kind of fear him to this day. Somehow I traded him an empty candy wrapper for a keychain of the Tasmanian devil.
This is like the Luka Doncic trade.
It was like
of its time.
It was exactly like the Luka Doncic trade. That is exactly it. Yeah. And honestly, I didn't have a fulfillment until that trade just happened. But my mom got a call from his mom and just was like, "Hey, this is what happened. This is unacceptable." And I was like, "Yeah, you're right. But hey, I got that trade to work out somehow." So anyway, I gave it back and whatever. So anyway, I've just always kind of been that way, just kind of, entrepreneurial, and all those desires got kind of rewired and reoriented when I went to formation, obviously. And I kind of thought I had given that up. And I think in some sense, that was a little bit of the dissonance, that I probably felt while in formation. So when I discerned out, it was like really exciting. Like, wow, okay, I kind of have a blank slate. What are we going to do? But had it not become what it became, I definitely wouldn't have been, doing other ecclesial work probably.
Glad you're using your bargaining powers for good, though.
Well, I did think that was the most innovative part of Exodus is you actually have guys mail you their booze and candy and junk food, and then you just get to have it while they give it up. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah. That's a good idea. I should write that down.
We do want to get to the origin story of Exodus 90, which I think started while you were still in the seminary. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So while I was there as a part of a fraternity of priests and seminarians who were just really passionate about men's work, and we had done a number of different projects for men, and one of them was Exodus 90. And we didn't call it that at the time. That's a whole different story. We just called it Exodus. Maybe I'll get into this because this is kind of an interesting, like, medium is the message moment. Obviously, we couldn't buy Exodus.com. It was owned by this, like, big bank or something like that. And so our contractor was like, "Hey, that's not available. What about Exodus90.com?" And I was like, "That's stupid. That just sounds kitschy." And like, I don't want to do that. Like, I was a philosopher and a theologian, and I was like, "Are we really going to do that?" So anyway, we did, and it kind of stuck. But for years, I think I told a couple of people from your team this offline a couple of weeks back, but I really resisted calling it Exodus 90. I was like, "No, we're Exodus. Like, don't call me that,
Well, is
Maybe,
the reason
But I finally accepted it. So anyway,
like Propedeutic 90.
yeah,
There could be something there.
But I have to. So was the reasoning for 90 because the program was always 90 days? It was not related to P. What's it called?
No.
P90X.
P90X.
Because
no relation to P90X. Mm-hmm. I've never even looked at that material, to be honest with you. So. So it's basically this 90-day journey through the book of Exodus. And I wasn't even in the first groups. This is something, kind of in the lore that's kind of established since, worth clarifying. I wasn't even in the first groups. I wasn't even at the original seminary, but I was friends with guys close to the origin of it. And so when I discerned out, it was kind of like, hey, maybe you can kind of share some of these ideas, with the world and, see what happens. But to be honest with you, it was never supposed to become anything. And it was really more than anything, supposed to keep me close to the group and go back to the seminary. That's kind of what I think.
Yeah.
It kind of took on a life of its own. And for me, what became so interesting about it was it actually connects to something my mom used to say to me regularly when I would come home from seminary. So my mom, she was a hairstylist by trade. And so to this day, no one has ever cut my hair except my mom. I made a vow to her that until she goes to God, no one will take the shears to my head. And I've honored this vow, from the day I made it.
She does a good job. For the people listening in audio, they can't tell, but
it's getting a little shaggy, to be honest. So that's one of the downsides. Is when our schedules don't collide. But one of the things that she would tell me when she was giving me haircuts was like, hey, this formation is obviously changing you and helping you. I feel like every Catholic man needs formation, and that just really struck me. And I think why I became so interested in applying myself to the project was, can I help to create a place of formation for men everywhere, whether or not they have callings to the priesthood. Every one of us is a priest, a prophet, and a king. I want to create that place. It should exist. So that's why I got so excited about it, and why I committed to it. And as for why I stayed, I feel like the thing, as all things, when you're starting out, so fragile. There was nothing to show for it. It was starting from zero. But just I look back on those early prayers and the gentleness of God to just keep going, and just the belief that everything was working together for my greatest good, whether or not in the earliest days I knew that the Exodus thing would work out.
Can you describe what the pitch is for maybe someone who hasn't ever heard of Exodus 90? What is it? What does it contain? What does it entail?
Yeah. So I'd say for me, everything has to go back to the fundamental why. And, we exist to be uncommonly free, is what we say. So everything we do now is focused upon personal freedom. So that's a loaded term, in the United States especially. But from a worldly sense too, it's like this idea that freedom is license, kind of doing what you would like whenever. But freedom in a Catholic vision is so very different than that. And we kind of look at, the story of Exodus as this perfect icon of, becoming who you were created to be, receiving your life as a gift and seeking daily, to correspond to the image that the Father has for you when you're but a thought, in his mind, from all eternity. So what is freedom? Freedom is correspondence with God's will. That's what it is. So, we can talk about kind of how Exodus works and all of our programs work. But the thrust, the mission is what's most important. It's to be free. And it's then that we're most fulfilled and fruitful as well. So, all that being said, kind of the how is kind of this prayerful, growing in the contemplative life. Not just saying prayers, but learning to growing in the confidence that you can hear and talk to God, and that relationship can transform your life, transform your daily decisions. So silent prayer is a big thing for us. The ascetic part is kind of what everybody talks about, and I do think can get even somewhat lost in. So we take on, challenging ways of life at different times of the year, but at other times of the year, we just kind of graft everything to the liturgical calendar. So at other times of the year, it's not really challenging at all, but it is a basic structure to live by in order to continue to make progress and to continue your personal growth. And kind of that ascetic element is balanced by the fraternity. So, everything that we do happens in a small group of 4 to 6 men, and those groups are all local groups. It's kind of that prayerful, ascetic, fraternal component that kind of makes our stuff special, everything being focused on the invitation to freedom.
What were your early conversations like when you were bringing this out of the seminary to lay men, and your pitch is, hey, do you want to pray for an hour every day and give up drinking and meat and sports and your phone, where people are like, yeah, that sounds great. I could use some of that in my life. Or did it take some convincing?
Well, because there's some people that are like, oh, it's like living in the seminary. And I'm like, no, it's a bit more like, I've seen seminaries that are much looser with some of those restrictions.
Yeah, oh, that's a good observation. So, honestly, I didn't know what to make of it, and I was kind of detached from how it would be received at all. I think I was really surprised, actually. This is another story. So, I had just discerned out, was completely broke, and was kind of bumming trains throughout Europe with my little brother, who now works with me full time. His name's Doyle. He's the man. Doesn't get enough credit. Without him, the thing never would have become what it has. But he had this idea. It's like, hey, we should crowdfund our first website. We needed like $8,000. And I was like, I don't have $8,000. I've never even touched $8,000 in my life. It's like, how are we going to do this? And so we had this idea to start a crowdfund. And by the time we were in Northern Europe, we had the money raised, got the site launched and turned on. And I have this vivid memory in a hostel in Austria, just so surprised by the number of people reaching out about it and asking us questions about how it worked. And I think I almost stayed up for a day straight at just answering these emails. So, even from the earliest days, there's a lot of interest in what it was about. But in terms of, there wasn't this like master plan on our part, it's, and there so rarely is this master plan that works perfectly, right? You're just kind of responding to what's in front of you. And our story is really no different than that.
Put one way, Exodus 90 is sort of this way of life, way of proceeding, this almost rule, to put it in monastic terms, that you're kind of applying or prescribing, and guys get together in small groups and hold each other accountable and create fellowship through that rule. Correct? Is that largely one description?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that's awesome.
What I think is some of the real innovation is that you have figured out how to put sort of a structure around it that allows people to tap into it and adjust to their own needs, but also like the technology piece. I think a lot of people would overlook, but it's actually pretty critical to, I think, what makes what you've done so successful. So I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit about that, because you could have just like set this up as a Facebook group, and it could have gone nowhere after that.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful observation. Yeah, really good one. So there's two elements there. Kind of the first I want to touch on is actually the ecclesial one. So by God's providence, I got connected with Bishop Kevin Rhodes, who's become a spiritual father to me and a friend. And this was kind of shortly after the story I just told you. And I needed some support. I kind of felt like I was trying to do a Catholic thing, but I didn't want to be rogue. I wasn't trying to even cause much of a stir. And, starting Catholic things, especially about 10 years ago, that's tough, right? I mean, like we like to say that, we're possessed by the fullness of the truth. And, the challenge to that is it's like, well, we have everything figured out. Now, so like my Protestant friends were in some ways the most supportive and encouraging for me. And it was like my Catholic and sometimes my old seminarian friends were like, what are you doing? Like you should go work for somebody else. What do you try?
Oh, so people were skeptical that like you needed a new thing for Catholics to use.
There's a lot of we do it this way, and we've always done it this way.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I just felt this need, like, hey, I need some support here. And I give him a lot of credit because he had this instinct 10 years ago, like, hey, I'll have, give you my blessing. I actually moved to his diocese just to like work under his blessing. I'm very affected by spaces and geography. So I was like, I just want to work under this blessing. And so I did, and kind of started from there. But his instinct was, hey, don't come work for me, in the diocesan office, be independent. And, if it's fruitful, it will grow. And, honestly, like that instinct was so powerful, and for me kind of tapped all my entrepreneurial kind of gifts from God in so many ways. So like I felt like I had the support of the church, but the freedom to be independent, and that allowed me to move a lot faster, try a lot of different things, change my mind about a lot, over the years.
That's a big fork in the road moment, because if he says, yeah, sure, we'll give you an office in the chancery, and
so I would have had a salary, but I think I just don't, again, like I was literally starting from zero, right? So, and I went full time from day one, and basically, worked on it pouring myself out for 3 full years, before it was sustaining my life in any way. Now I was just out of the seminary, so it's like, who cares? It's like, I'm not used to having anything. But obviously I couldn't have been married with children. I'm married now and have 3 young children. There's no way I could be doing this over again, and it just kind of all collided well, within God's providence for me.
I mean, you couldn't have done it, but I don't think the platform grows to what it is at all.
No,
if you're
all.
within the traditional church structure.
No way. Yeah. And the other thing I would just say is, it's like hard to think back 10 years ago, but at the time, all church programming flowed top down. Bishop, priests to community leaders to the people in the pews. And ours was completely the opposite. It was very much kind of attached to this kind of movement of, direct to consumer. I'm saying that in hyphens for those that are listening, kind of that movement. And that was kind of the model, was like, hey, if this is helpful, take it, bring it to your local community, invite your friends. And to be honest with you, 10 years later, we've been growing that way, ever since. We are just now in year 10 starting to support parishes who have like many fraternities, 50 to 100 guys or so. But, it's so far from where we started. The second thing is on the technology piece. I was fairly reluctant to build technology, to be honest with you. We made all those decisions though in 2018, so this is years before COVID happened, right? And when everyone woke up to like, oh wow, we need digital mediums, and I just, I honestly barely had a smartphone. I've been off social media for almost 10 years now, and I wasn't on it very much before that. So I really didn't even know how it all was working at the time, but it came from just listening to guys and their encouragements first. And then I prayed about it a lot. And I had this experience where I was at Mass and there were so few people there. And the church was beautiful. And I was just like, how can I bridge people out there here? And I just felt like technology could serve that end if done well. And so, there's lots of benefits to building, your own technology, and not relying on big technology platforms that, don't share your values and can, there's a whole podcast we could do about that.
Sure,
but
yeah.
There's something really powerful actually about kind of building your own thing from line one, in your values with people who kind of share a similar vision for life. So, both were important elements for us.
What do you think the response to when you initially put this out to the world and you say, you were hearing from people almost immediately, what does that say about what men are and aren't getting from the church? If there's just this hunger for something that's outside the normal structures, is demanding. What was your read of that?
Yeah, there's so many different things that kind of come to mind. I think, I think men really need spaces that are for them, and women need spaces that are for them, and both of those places are sacred spaces that are different. When a man is involved in a women's group or a woman's involved in a men's group, the dynamics change quite a bit. So, we've been focused on just creating, we call it like a sacred space for men to be known, to share honestly. It's not, our groups are not supposed to be, what you've accomplished, who you're connected to, all that stuff. It's really meant to be this place in the world where you can just tell the truth about, where you are, what you're struggling with, how you believe God's at work in your life. And I think at the time, there was a bit of a void that a lot of men experienced. And we've stayed really faithful to and focused upon men's formation. And, we could talk about why we've chosen to do that later on. But I think that's part of it. I think another element too is, this was true 10 years ago and this is true now. Well, let me put it this way, and personally, I'd spent years, in formation. And I did have a somewhat irregular, even high school experience. I was like really into the faith. I prayed a lot. I played a lot of competitive golf too. Those are like the two things I did.
You scratch golfer today, or?
I was at 17.
Not
so
bad.
I'm not anymore. I don't play enough now.
Not bad.
I would love to get back there. It's that those were like my things. And so, but after all that time in preparation, I just had this itch, like, what has all of this been for? And it's like, I'm comfortable reading books and I'm comfortable writing essays and, I'm comfortable doing philosophical and theological activities. How can I put this to work in real life for regular people, none of whom have time for any of these things that I'm reading? And, that's something that, became very interesting to me. And so I would say I was both, just to kind of reveal my own internal system here a little bit. When you become particular, it's kind of embarrassing. It's just like, hey, yeah, we're going to take cold showers and read this part of the Bible and, do these things. It's like, well, like, it can't be like that. It's just that, it's like the more particular you become, it is kind of embarrassing.
Which is kind of how it's like talked about. Like, I don't know. Someone's like, oh, are you doing that Exodus 90 thing? Like, oh, is that the thing where they do the cold showers? It's like, from the outsides. But yeah, I know what you mean.
For sure. And it's so easy to straw man, for that reason. And I'm painfully aware of that. And I can understand that even actually, from the outside looking in. But you talk to young men really looking for direction and trying to make adjustments to their life. So often at the very end of whatever you might talk about or whatever affirmations you might give, the question that they will ask you is, what do I need to do? And I think we've just been really concrete, and like, hey, this is what we're going to do, this time of the year. And in some sense, it's as simple as being that concrete. And that really corresponds. I don't want to say with every man. That's not the case. But with many men and many men looking for direction today, maybe especially, men who have not had great mentors and great fathers, finding a fraternity can be such a refreshing and really, an experience that they just have never had before. And when you make it concrete for them, it's actually very helpful for them to be able to make some steps, that they want to take.
You're a smart guy, so I'm sure you did some like market analysis and why this maybe didn't exist, because I think in a previous era, this was the Knights of Columbus for a lot of guys. And I'm curious maybe why that, I don't know. I'm sure for a lot of guys, the Knights of Columbus still is this. So I don't want to like make this about why isn't the knight, but like, I don't know, there's an image I have of parish life where this is sort of like where men went for their sacred space, where they kind of did things, but I don't know, it's kind of fallen off. And maybe that has to do with parish life and how it's changed. Maybe it has to do with like how men have changed, but where was that in the Catholic landscape?
Yeah. I hesitate to just kind of like make a categorical statement about the Knights, because I run into councils all the time that are awesome, and like really on fire and doing great things. And I also just have a real place of appreciation for all the good works they do serving, the needs of the most disenfranchised all around the world, and at a scale that I can't even fathom as someone running, the beginnings of an independent little thing. But I would just say, at least, locally in our experience, that it wasn't competing with really anything at the time. And it's not obvious to me, that we're competing, if you will. I use that term like really in a hesitating kind of way, but, we're just kind of running in our lane, really focused on freedom. And, it's like, it's just an open invitation. So, we try not to, lean too much into typical, kind of men's rhetoric, which I have always found uninspiring and unhelpful.
Say more about that. What is typical men's rhetoric?
Yeah. I mean, it's just, well, it's easy. I think especially at the time, I would often show up to men's conferences and have a bit of a mixed experience, because it's just easy to make these kind of, do these things, or you're not a man, or just kind of be really harsh about the faith and kind of reduce it to, to maxims that just didn't really resonate with me. And I personally found that focusing on freedom and then focusing upon growing in who you uniquely are created to be for our time, who no one else is called to be, to just be, much more inspiring. So, we've always tried to stay, and I'm not saying, in 10 years you make mistakes, I imagine you would say you guys have made a couple mistakes. I would say that too.
I
But,
would. I would. I don't know if Zac would.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm still
maybe
waiting.
Zac would.
Still waiting.
Yeah, still waiting. So bear with me. But I think we've really tried to stay focused on that fundamental kind of invitation, and that's really resonated. And even 10 years later, I hear all the time from guys who are like, I really thought this thing was stupid, and then somebody I respected invited me into a group, and this was really powerful for me.
Sorry,
and that's kind of a beautiful thing.
I feel like I'm dominating, but we're talking about man stuff right now, so I'm just,
I'll give you your sacred space.
thanks. But I feel like oftentimes, just be honest with you, Jamie, like the times where I've been uncomfortable, skeptical, or just like about Exodus 90 is I feel like when it comes into contact with some of that traditional like man talk that happens in the church, because because you guys are kind of independent, it is probably just intersecting at different times where it's like this heavy reliance on like spiritual warfare imagery, or just like absolutizing, like it's got to be this, or we're not doing stuff hard enough, we've got to man up, we've got to.
And it's also coupled with like a critique of the church becoming too feminized.
Yeah.
And so it kind of you feel like it's pitting men and women against each other.
Yeah, and that has also never really worked for me. I'm usually like respectful in those places, and then I see myself out. So I'm very refreshed hearing you talk about that, because I think freedom is sort of this message that I think a lot of guys could use in today's age.
Yeah, and I don't want to like downplay the guys for which that's like really inspiring and helpful. To be called on and to be challenged, and definitely, our things are challenging, right? I mean, when you commit to them, you're like, wow, okay, I'm gonna probably do some things I haven't been doing, maybe I've never done before, and we'll see what happens. But this is, and I'd say maybe the ascetic tradition of the church is, the fundamental kind of thrust here, if you will. But you're not gonna, when you look at history, the Desert Fathers are a group that I spend a lot of time in, and their influence is kind of all over this thing. This was a lay movement 300 years after Christ. And as Christianity is legalized, and the threat of worldliness faces the faith for the first time, some men and women were called out into the desert seeking perfection, which we're called to. And in profound, austerity, and through challenges that are, really unbelievable. And, I say all this because, the challenging and kind of the ascetic element is so important, I think, especially for men today, to remember. But there's a way of doing that that's annoying, and there's a way of doing that well. And I think what we talk about is, one, you got to teach well about asceticism, or else it can kind of lead to kind of I got to prove this to myself or to others, which is so far from what we teach. Or it can kind of lead to a bit of a puffed up chest. It's like, great, look at me, look at all these great things I'm doing for God, and again, that's, Jerome actually says in the 4th century, beware, when you begin, to take up asceticism, and it kind of reframes it. It's like, asceticism is but a means to a much more important end, which is the love of God and the love of neighbor. And so as important as the challenge is, and as much as it speaks to the heart of men today, it needs to be coupled well with Catholic thought and teaching, because, sometimes I think we can get kind of misunderstood as like Christian stoicism. I actually look at the Stoic movement as the inversion of what we're trying to accomplish, literally the foil of what we're trying to do. And Stoicism, of course, has a massive influence today, and the extent to which we can take it down, I think that'd be a great accomplishment, because I think that Stoicism is, downstream of so much kind of self-centeredness that's very far from the life and witness of our Lord. And I think maybe lastly on the challenge element, it's like the Lord calls, the 12 apostles to it's incredible. I mean, they don't even really know what they commit to when they sign up for it, right? I mean, I think of James and John sitting at his right and left, like, hey, we want these great places in your kingdom. And, the Lord says, like, do you know what you're asking for? And they say, like, yeah, like, we can do it, and James is the first martyr, and John, who, is his beloved disciple, suffers through the longest life of them all, away from the Lord he loves, which is to say, from the earliest years, companionship with Christ is possible, but it implies, there's a lot of consequences, and the Lord of glory is nailed to a tree, and if he doesn't rise from the dead, our faith is in vain. But at the same time, the Lord does not compel the apostles. He invites them. Hey, come follow me, or, come and see, and I think that's the balance we've tried to strike, not to compromise the challenge, not to compromise the call to conversion, but to make it, invitational, and if the message resonates, and typically it resonates through an internal dissonance of a knowledge that I'm unfree in an area that I need to bring before God. It's been a powerful, equation that's resonated with a lot of men.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious about the women who are involved, or not directly involved, but are indirectly involved when their husbands decide to take on these challenges. How do you make sure that it doesn't tip over into that self-centeredness that can come with these practices, and that it's, fruitful for both husband and wife?
Yeah, I'd love to say that, this is something that we've always gotten perfectly, and I'll just admit to not. That's just not the case. And part of this, guys, is just like my story, right? It's like I had, never been in a relationship when I started the work,
Yeah, because it was from the context of a seminary. There were no women around.
Yeah.
Or young children that, keeping you up all night.
Yeah, right. So, and it's I just admit to probably not having done that as well in the earliest years. And in some sense, the earliest years were a bit of an experiment. Like, hey, is any of this stuff going to resonate out here at all? Mm-hmm. And that was a surprise to me, actually, that it did, honestly. And so, over the last couple of years, and part of it has just been being married now, having many children. It's like there are things that you learn very quickly in the feedback loop that is your spouse, your sacrament. That's helpful, and so for us, one of the things we talk about, really openly now that we weren't so clear on at the beginning was, hey, if your spouse isn't on board with this is not your year, and we offer many programs all throughout the year, and, an Easter experience as well. Doesn't require you to kind of rewire, your entire way of life. So there's other formation experiences that we offer that are perhaps less abrupt. But that's an important element, to have the support of your spouse, and for men to communicate, to their spouse, what this entails. But the other thing we've done much better over the years is incorporating the liturgical calendar, into the Exodus experience. So, we relax a discipline on Sundays and solemnities. We bring in feast days that enrich the experience every year. Obviously, Easter moves, so our start date moves, and that changes the feast we celebrate obviously throughout the experience. And we really encourage. At the same time, like, hey, when your family life just goes, when this kind of way of life goes against where your family is at. So on Wednesdays and Fridays were early fast days for Christians, which was a response to, the pagan feast days, which I believe were fast days, which were Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so this was kind of a, okay, as Christians, we're going to observe these days, Wednesday being the day that Judas betrays Jesus, Friday being, the day of the cross. But what we say is, hey, Friday is a penitential day, all throughout the year, apart from solemn feast days. But Wednesday, I know that's just not normal. So it's like, if you or your spouse forgets that and you eat meat that day, it's like, it's okay. Just let it go, And so, we've tried to kind of balance kind of the family needs kind of with still being able to take our men on a journey that ultimately is designed for them to grow in freedom for love. So my favorite letters that I get are from spouses, actually, about what happens, to their spouse, through the experience. And so often it's the case, and this is just, when I reflect on my own life, it's just like, I just get distracted in my things, in my couple of hobbies, and sometimes even in my work, and it can absolutely take away from my presence at home. What's so powerful, especially about Exodus 90, is you're asked to really return technology to a place of a tool, that you have to for school and for work. It's not a place of kind of entertainment, and so that leaves a lot of time. Our average guy saves over an hour a day, for him to find time for God and for communion. Actually, sharing conversation with his spouse, one-on-one time with his kids, and all that. So anyway, those are just a couple of thoughts about how we've tried to teach well, around the disciplines of our work.
I've said this before, but I want to, and I'm sure it's something you've heard before, and I want to give you a chance to kind of respond to it directly. But initially, some of my hesitations or worries about Exodus 90 is it has this like air of like, we're going to do Lent, but harder, faster, stronger, and getting back to that kind of traditional, like hyper masculine stuff. I'm curious what your response is to that, because it is sort of tied to Lent, right? Because it's tied to Easter. But obviously, I think you guys are trying to do something different too.
Yeah, that's a great question, Zach. I would just say this is not something that's well known anymore, but we didn't start it as a 90 Days to Easter program. That happened to us. So we just started as a 90-day thing. And then 2 or 3 years in.
Is there like a rhyme or reason to the 90-day thing?
Yeah, so the basic elements were, the idea was an extended period of time to make an adjustment to your way of life. And of course, there's been tons of like habit stuff that's come out since then. That's been really good. That's influenced me a lot. But the idea was an extended period of time to begin to see adjustments to your way of life.
Dry January is not enough. It's like 30 days doesn't actually do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing we're also trying to take into account is, like even in the book of Exodus, it's like the journey to the promised land for the people of Israel is not a straight shot.
A lot of grumbling. Lots of ups, downs, all arounds, and lots of things that I think all of us, if we're honest, can really relate to. I certainly can. And so like we kind of, that's baked into the whole experience. It's like some days are going to go great. Some days are not going to go great. That's all right. That's how it works. It's not about kind of a perfectionism. It's about beginning again, with the support of your fraternity. So that's kind of how we look at it. But yeah, so we didn't start it as a 9 Days to Easter thing. 2 or 3 years in, that happened to us. There was only a few hundred guys before that, but then all of a sudden, and I think it was 2017, there was like 1,500 guys that signed up in a couple of days. I thought it was a joke. I honestly thought someone had spammed me. So it happened on a weekend because it's Sunday's the start. So I didn't even look into it. I was like, I'll look at this, later. And I was like, oh my gosh, I think it's starting to work. This is crazy. And again, it's just this phenomenon of, men inviting their friends, men who had been through the experience the first year and first couple of years starting to begin that invitation journey. And like I said, we've been growing that way ever since. So eventually we accepted like, okay, this 90 Days to Easter thing, and that's something we came up with. Interesting idea. Part of me, I wasn't super familiar actually with all of the, still observed in the Eastern churches, but this idea around Lenten preparation, which were embedded into, the old Roman calendar. And part of me thinks that it's just kind of it's in the subconsciousness of people, that Lent and the sacred, Paschal mystery is worth preparing for, preparing a long time for, preparing well for. Again, I think the Eastern churches are such a interesting and beautiful example to us in the West. So yeah, I usually hit the Sunday before Ash Wednesday, and I hear it at Mass, like, oh, right,
yeah,
got to get on that.
That kind of happened, and but in terms of this idea of to just get to concretely like Lent but harder, I don't know. I think I just look at the church, and she's just a treasure. She's just beautiful. And there's so many different spiritualities, some of which rhyme really well together, others of which don't. And, this ascetic thing, I think resonates a lot with many men today, many more men than I ever thought, when I started. But I don't pretend to, be trying to go get, 500 million Catholic men. And I think that's kind of a bit of the detachment that I have from it. It's and at the same time, all of my attempts to describe who it's for have been proved wrong in the faces of so many people that I've just stopped even trying to define them. And I would say, just to, America ran an article on us, last year. Maybe we'll bring this up. But that was one of the things that was somewhat disappointing, actually. It was like really trying to kind of label and categorize the guys of Exodus. And it's just been so untrue in my lived experience and locally too, not just, running this national and international thing now, but just the faces of guys near me in Indiana. So, and so what I say now is like, hey, it's for who it's for. And if it's for you, we'd love to welcome you. And if it's not, it's, the church is a treasure. And there are so many powerful saints and founders and spiritualities. And when I say that, it's not with an ounce of relativism. It's just that the gifts of God are manifold and they're distinct. But at the same time, there are these particular charisms and things that really resonate, with people. I think at the same time, it's like, the respect on the other side is just like, wow, all right, that's cool, and kind of being open to the idea that this isn't for, any one guy in particular.
Yeah. What's the plan for Easter?
Yeah, so we're journeying through the book of Deuteronomy, which might be a weird thing to to go through after the book of Exodus, but
this year it's branded as Deuteronomy.
Yeah, dude. Oh, we should have. No, we just call it
you
Easter.
Should not have.
Yeah, we just call it Easter 50. So it's just this idea of, and this is something I've been thinking about for a long time, is, how do we live the fullness of the Easter season? It's 50 days long. It's longer than Lent.
Yeah, hard to sustain your celebratory mood for that long.
Yeah, and a lot of the times Lent can be a really meaningful experience for people because they give up something or they take on, they make an addition to their routines that are like helpful to them. And so is it really the case that in the quote joy of the resurrection, we just leave it all behind, and go back to ways that, are unsatisfying to us actually? And so we kind of look at, so we use Deuteronomy because we are this year because, this is the instruction that God gives, through Moses to the people of Israel about how to live in the promised land. And so that's kind of our fundamental theme. So, there's a couple of practices, commitments to prayer, to the reading of scripture. But really the distinction that we want to make is like, hey, every one of us has a personal mission, and that mission is different from every other man that we know. And we want to kind of take advantage of the Easter season to enter into our missions in a new way this year. So those are our themes and a couple of things we're up to with Easter this year.
Very cool. Yeah, I mean, this idea of how to sustain Easter, I've always felt like part of it's just like the human condition of like we see through a mirror dimly. So like trying to actually visualize what the life and the resurrection is supposed to be like, there's just like a stumbling block for us. Whereas like the cross, we were, it's, I don't know, feels like it hits the human condition on this side of heaven a little bit easier. But I like this idea of like creating culture and community and feast days and common practices. Like it makes a lot of sense for trying to make something resembling what I think we're called to as a church.
That's right. So we encourage our fraternities to continue to meet, but for those to take on a festive flair. So throwing feasts. So, we really talk about how it's like, hey, because we fasted, we can feast well, and when we're trying to just feast all the time, without any kind of preparation, it devalues, our feasts lose meaning. And that's, ultimately unsatisfying. So, in Easter, we're really trying to enter into, just the building up of Christian culture, which, is just been so fundamental to who we are as Catholics, and so many people have kind of forget that invitation. And so, and this is not only true of our groups, but these kind of feasts that we throw is inviting people from the neighborhood, from the community, people that don't share the faith with us, but letting them see, inviting them to partake in the joy of these mysteries. And I would also just say as well, in the formation of these fraternities, we encourage guys not to invite only guys that share the faith, but just those that God places on their hearts. So we have a growing percentage of guys that are not Catholic, many of whom don't practice a faith, but find themselves in these Exodus fraternities. And that's a really, powerful kind of bridge, kind of going back to that original inspiration to be a bridge back to the church that I hope that we can, be faithfully.
All right. I think that's a good place to end.
Yeah. I think I could have done like 2 more hours on this. I really appreciate you taking the time, especially, you mentioned that article America ran. I really appreciate you coming on to chat with us about your journey and
clear up
Exodus
some
90's
misconceptions.
Yeah, some people on this podcast have perpetuated. So I really appreciate the time.
Yeah.
No, I'm grateful for it. And honestly, I would say this. I told this to a couple of the folks at your team. I want to give the seminary and Noah a shout out because I ran into him at a conference because, I didn't quite know how to respond to it all. And, one of the things that I don't have social media. And so it kind of makes it easy for me to just things get written and you let them go. But I always, the things that get written about us that I think are not quite fully informed, I still appreciate people giving their time and energy to think about us. And so I always disenframe it and I pray over it. It's like, hey, what is the gift for me in this? And one of the gifts that kind of came was kind of a correction on almsgiving. It was like, where is almsgiving within the thrust of our work? And, part of that's worth a conversation. There was no almsgiving because we didn't even see it as a Lenten thing, I think is part of that explanation. But we do launch separate Lent programs now, and almsgiving has become, specifically additional contributions to the poor in your local community. That's a direct fruit, honestly, of that correction. So anyway, I just want to say there are aspects of that were tough that I would have loved to talked about before.
Yeah.
But there were still fruits from it, and I think I wanted to thank, you for just the opportunity to share, from the heart of the work and, really what we're trying to do for men today.
Amazing.
We do have one final question for you that we ask all of our guests, and that is if you could canonize anyone, living or dead, Catholic or not, fictional or real, who would it be and why?
Oh, gosh. I'm going to say my Uncle Stu in the Stuniverse. And you know what? Despite wherever he was that day, when the tragedy happened and just his decision to kind of enter into that and change his life, which was unbelievably unlikely. It's ultimately rippled all the way through our family tree. So,
and to a lot of guys, and women who are benefiting from Exodus 90 today. So
that's right.
To Uncle Stu, patron saint of the Stuniverse.
All right. If people want to learn more about Exodus 90, where should they go?
Yeah, just check out exodus90.com or download the Exodus 90 app on your app store. It's the best place to find us. Yeah, I don't have social. I live a pretty under a rock life, but those are the best places to see what we're up to and what we're working on.
Awesome. Well, Jamie, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, Zac, Ashley, thank you, and have a blessed Easter season.
Yeah, you too.